Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing the realest and the scariest rabbit hole you might find on YouTube. Why? Because why is it scary? Because it's actually factually happening. And at this point, it doesn't look like there's a lot of chance of reversing it. All the other topics are things that, you know, possibly we could swing one way or the other, possibly shed some light on, and all the truth will be revealed. But, you know, this is the truth nobody wants to be revealed because it sucks, for lack of a better descriptor. Just going to roll through some news headlines today. If you all haven't seen this, sorry, I'm doing this at the end of the day, so I'm way behind the jump, but that's all right. So if you haven't heard, and I'm sure you already have heard, Jair Bolsonaro was elected president in Brazil. Far-right candidate wins Brazil poll. Far-right politician Jair Bolsonaro has won a sweeping victory in Brazil's presidential election. The former army captain won 55.2% of the vote against 44.8% of the vote for Fernando Haddad of the left-wing Workers' Party. Mr. Bolsonaro's pledge to fight crime and corruption following a string of scandals have won him mass support. However, critics are worried by his praise of Brazil's former dictatorship and by his comments on race, women, and homosexuality. In one infamous incident in 2015, he told a fellow lawmaker she was too ugly to rape. Whoa. Mr. Bolsonaro's controversial comments, his pro-gun stance, and his populist approach to politics have led some media dubbing him the Trump of the tropics. President Trump himself took to Twitter on Monday to praise the Brazilian president-elect. And I'm not going to read Trump's tweet because it's just a blah, blah, blah. For his supporters, Mr. Bolsonaro is a politician who they say will bring much-needed change to the country. A swing to the right after 4 elections won by the left. For the past 4 years, Brazil has been consumed by a criminal investigation known as Operation Car Wash that has uncovered massive corruption. Dozens of business and political leaders have been jailed. Among them was former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who was barred from standing in the election. I'm not going to read any more of this. I'm going to link the article if you all want to read some more of this. If it's excuse me. If the left party and the left-wing rule of Brazil has brought corruption and definitely not great things in the world of climate change, one can only imagine where they're heading. Looking like he will be rolling back whatever protections are in place for the environment in Brazil, which is not good at all. It's already bad, and it's going to get worse. Oh, yay. This is from Huffington Post today. Venice, Italy, hit with the worst flooding in a decade as tourists wade through landmarks. So they've been getting record rain in Venice, other parts of Italy as well. Venice, Italy was hit with a particularly high tide on Monday as more than 5 feet of water covered some 70% of the city, according to local officials, who said the surge was the highest in nearly a decade. Photos from the Italian tourist Mecca show visitors and locals wading through many of the city's most notable sites, including Piazza di San Marco and Rialto Bridge. The water rose even higher than the elevated walkways city officials usually install during routine flooding so people can avoid wading through the streets, and authorities eventually removed them so that they wouldn't get damaged. Local homes and businesses were also struggling to keep out of the floodwaters, according to the Associated Press. The floodwaters have climbed to some 156 centimeters, a little more than 5 feet above normal, according to city statistics, the highest recorded water level since December 2008. The tide is expected to be several feet above normal for much of this week, Venice officials said. Italy is dealing with a spate of foul weather, and at least 6 people have been killed nationwide as flooding and heavy winds buffet the region, downing trees and causing widespread mayhem. Schools and popular tourist sites were also closed in Rome, including the Colosseum and the Roman Forum. Lots of people standing around in waiters and rolling their pants up. Venice regularly floods, often dramatically, as the city has struggled with rising seas and a growing influx of tourists. The city has been working on an ambitious engineering project nicknamed Project Moses to protect Venice from future floodwaters, but the effort has been plagued by cost overruns and a corruption scandal since it began in 2003. When it's finished, several massive retractable gates are meant to block the mouth of the city's lagoons when extremely high tides come in, theoretically protecting Venice until the water retreats. What if it doesn't work? The project is expected to be completed by 2022 and has already cost some $6.5 billion, or lira, or whatever it is that they're using. It doesn't say. Minor flooding would still take place in certain areas when floodwater is below the level needed to activate the system of gates. That's all I'm going to read of that. I'm going to link this below, and I will move on and hold the presses. I feel like, excuse me. This is actually the article I was looking for. Let me see if I can get to the meat of this article quickly. This is from The Guardian, also about the same story, 3/4 of Venice flooded by exceptional high tide. Oh, maybe not. Actually, what I wanted to get to, excuse me. Well, I'm going to read this comment from Terry Hassan. I thought an interesting point in this story is much of Italy is under flood alert due to heavy rains, a problem exacerbated by lack of maintenance of the country's many riverbeds. And he was saying, as economies throughout the world, including the West, struggle, reduced funds for infrastructure will increase the impact of climate change on societies. Definitely. How many extreme weather events, emergency situations are going to quickly deplete the funds, the FEMA funds and the emergency funds of many countries to deal with this stuff. It is, and it will become overwhelming. So let's move on. I'm trying to get through a bunch of articles today, so I don't know if I'm going to read entire pieces, but we'll see. Hold on. Well, this is a short one. What's going on here? This is from The Guardian as well. Lots of articles from The Guardian. Friday, October 26th. Facts about our ecological crisis are incontrovertible. We must take action. So humans cannot continue to violate the fundamental laws of nature or science with impunity, says 94 signatories, including Dr. Allison Green and Molly Scott Cato, MEP. We, the undersigned, represent diverse academic disciplines, and the views expressed here are those of the signatories and not their organizations. While our academic perspectives and expertise may differ, we are united on one point: we will not tolerate the failure of this or any other government to take robust and emergency action in respect of the worsening ecological crisis. The science is clear, the facts are incontrovertible, and it is unconscionable to us that our children and grandchildren should have to bear the terrifying brunt of an unprecedented disaster of our own making. We are in the midst of the sixth mass extinction, with about 200 species becoming extinct each day. Humans cannot continue to violate the fundamental laws of nature or science with impunity if we continue on our current path. The future for our species is bleak. Our government is complicit in ignoring the precautionary principle and in failing to acknowledge that infinite economic growth on a planet with finite resources is non-viable. Instead, the government irresponsibly promotes rampant consumerism and free market fundamentalism and allows greenhouse gas emissions to rise. Earth Overshoot Day, the date when humans have used up more resources from nature than the planet can renew in the entire year, falls ever earlier each year, the 1st of August in 2018. When a government willfully abrogates its responsibility to protect its citizens from harm and to secure the future for generations to come, it has failed in its most essential duty of stewardship. The social contract has been broken, and it is therefore not only our right, but our moral duty to bypass the government's inaction and flagrant dereliction of duty and to rebel, to defend life itself. And what we were talking about the other day, the article that I read about what was the necessity defense, I think I'm messing that up. Right, the court case in which the judge threw out the charges against the valve turners. We therefore declare our support for Extinction Rebellion, launching on the 31st of October 2018. All right, that's soon. We fully stand behind the demands for the government to tell the hard truth to its citizens. We call for a citizens' assembly to work with scientists on the basis of the extant evidence, and in accordance with the precautionary principle, to urgently develop a credible plan for rapid total decarbonization of the economy. Wow. So a bunch of signatories from all over England backing this Extinction Rebellion. I wonder what's going to happen. What does it all mean? Will this prompt some kind of similar action in the United States? Are we going to have to take matters in our own hands? Signs point to yes. That's from the Magic 8 Ball. All kinds of interesting stuff happening here. This is also from The Guardian. This is from this is from July 2016. Okay. Well, why am I going to read this? Because it's interesting, but it's also very old, and nothing happened, so it doesn't really matter. All right, moving on. Sorry. Moving on to a story about Bitcoin from Forbes. Bitcoin, this is from today, Bitcoin predicted to be the nail in the coffin of climate change. Okay, one little cryptocurrency, or the biggest cryptocurrency. Bitcoin alone could push global temperatures over the 2C catastrophic threshold by 2034. If the cryptocurrency gets adopted at the same pace as other broadly used technologies, says a new report in the journal Nature Climate Change. You're forgiven if you aren't familiar with a digital currency that could single-handedly devastate the planet. 6 months ago, I wasn't either, said Camilo Mora, lead author of the study. When co-author Katie Talladay first proposed analyzing Bitcoin's emissions, Mora thought she was kidding. I thought it was a video game. What came from the analysis floored the research team. From the paper, reducing emissions to keep warming below 2C is already regarded as a very difficult challenge given the increasing human population and consumption, as well as a lack of political will. Then came Bitcoin. Critics of this report point to how difficult it is to calculate power usage because of how dispersed the Bitcoin network is. They also point to the IT sector's efforts in reducing its footprint. Excuse me, it is certainly very possible that tomorrow we create a new technology that will produce electricity without emissions, said Mora. But it is just as possible that we do not. Are we willing to take a gamble when at stake is the viability of our planet? According to the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook, between 55 and 65% of the electricity by 2040 may still be produced by coal, gas, and oil. So decarbonization of electricity is something that we should push harder, but the full conversion is still far. Critics of this analysis say it's not the case that energy consumption will remain fixed over the next 100 years. However, the report's urgency points to the impact Bitcoin would have over the next 16 to 23 years, suggesting Bitcoin and probably every area impacting climate change may have to act a lot faster to reduce carbon emissions. The estimated emissions produced by Bitcoin last year alone is 69 million metric tons of CO2. 69 million. Moore calls the number mind-blowing. That is the source of concern for us. If this technology is so insignificant and the footprint is so big, can you imagine if this thing were to take off? It is not insignificant at all, actually, but not as big as, the world combined economies. As Bitcoin gains popularity, its energy demands increase dramatically. We don't have a single thing, not agriculture, not transportation, that we can think of that in 2 decades would be enough to warm the planet by 2 degrees, but Bitcoin can. What's causing this emissions explosion? Bitcoin miners are the reason for the ugly energy report card. Bitcoin has no central bank. It's peer-to-peer decentralized network for digital currency. Bitcoin purchases generate blocks of data. It's like a folder with a complicated math problem. Inside is the key. A miner is simply anyone who wants to join the Bitcoin network and owns powerful Bitcoin processing hardware necessary to support the software capable of solving the key and verifying the Bitcoin. This makes Bitcoin super hard to counterfeit. As compensation for providing this level of computationally intensive security, miners get a percentage of the Bitcoins they verify. But verification takes an enormous amount of energy, and as Bitcoin gets more broadly adopted, the energy demands increase perilously. The current analysis suggests mining data for profit is even more destructive to the planet than mining the planet itself for profit. Okay. Research methods. The researchers incorporated previous peer-reviewed methods from Digiconomist in their analysis and tracked the power efficiency of hardware used for Bitcoin mining with the geographic location of miners and the CO2 emissions of producing electricity in those regions. Another of the paper's authors, Randy Rollins, said their dire estimates are quite conservative. The hardware requirements for mining Bitcoin generate a lot of heat. The energy needed to cool the Bitcoin mining rigs weren't even factored into the emissions estimates. Is there any chance both Bitcoin and the planet can survive? Bitcoin is public and transparent. There's no vetting process for miners. Anyone can become one, which is why there are no emission standards applicable to miners. It may seem like Bitcoin is an ecological fail in a global libertarian experiment. Ironically, many Bitcoin advocates who champion libertarian values say it's up to the governments, not Bitcoin, to impose standards that require implementation of renewable energy technologies to reduce emissions. An argument can be made that Bitcoin's emissions trajectory is no more Bitcoin's fault as it is humanity's fault for not hastening the transition to renewable energy. The authors of today's paper argue that given its impact, Bitcoin needs to take an active role in solving the problem. One possible way for Bitcoin to reduce its footprint might be to make keys easier to resolve, but this could potentially leave the currency more vulnerable to counterfeit. If it's easier to solve, more miners get in the market, thereby maintaining or increasing the emissions footprint as adoption increases. Right. What is it called? Oh, Jevons paradox. Yeah. Well, and along with the whole Bitcoin phenomenon is the well-traveled, well-talked about, well-worn idea that when the global governments or the central banks of the world are going to crash the economy and replace paper currency with digital currency as a means of control, which makes total sense, actually. And the fact that there's so many cryptocurrencies out there in use right now, that Bitcoin is actually very, very popular. Right now, Bitcoin is a means of liquidity outside of the system of central banks. But the technology is there for central banks and governments to just kind of like gobble up this whole idea and make it a standardized world currency. I mean, people have been talking about this for a while. And then what would that do? What effect would that have on emissions and on global warming, temperature rise, if the world economy were using a blockchain type of system? And with the fact that things are increasingly turning to a blockchain type system of verification, privacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not great. Not a great thing. So, one moment. I'm going to finish up this video. I'm going to stick with a bit of a political theme, or I'm talking somewhat more about politics in this video, but this is from Eudaimonia. Never heard of it. It's some website. Is this what's the parent? The parent is Medium, so maybe this is just a, I don't know what. Anyways, this is an article called "How American Collapse is Becoming American Implosion" by Umair Haq. The final stage of collapse in the institutionalization of mass violence. This is my first time reading this, so of course we've had bombings and shootings and bombings and all kinds of stuff going on, all kinds of madness sweeping towards us in the last week, on top of the whole migrant caravan situation. Consider, I don't know where this article is going to go, so I don't know how long I'm going to read it. But anyways, consider 3 events from the last 2 weeks in America. Fascists beat people on the streets of Manhattan. An organized campaign of mass political bombing by an ardent member of the authoritarian movement was thwarted just in time. And yet, that very same authoritarian movement, expressing no remorse, let alone culpability, began to demonize refugees approaching the border as a caravan packed with mafias and terrorists, precisely the kind of delusion that had probably inspired the bomber. American collapse is becoming American implosion, my friends. How so? As always, you are to judge, and I will simply state my case. A decade or so ago, I used to point out, or at least try to, that America was a failing state. Now the pundits, cosseted in their bubbles, neatly swaddled in the safety blankets of ideology, a little more cruelty, it's good for everyone, laughed and cried, failing, LOL, how, get a grip, dude. Yet even then, if you cared enough to look, you could see very clearly even then the problems that would lead directly to American collapse. Skyrocketing inequality, a struggling middle, shrinking real economies, failing public institutions of every kind, a long history of tribalism, seemingly no escape from all the preceding, hence a growing sense of despair, rage, and frustration, a catastrophic loss of trust in institutions, faith in the future, the optimism for society, bang, a perfect classic setup for social collapse. It's not that I'm some kind of oracle by any means. It's that I was one of a handful of people who bothered to look up at the gathering dust. I wondered, in fact, why more didn't, but I digress. And then America did collapse, funnily enough, ironically enough, when no one thought it would or even could, in 3 precise ways, which is what I'd always meant by American collapse. Society collapsed structurally into a place where the middle was a minority, a mobility and opportunity where things Mobility and opportunity were things of the past. The economy collapsed from one that offered something like a dream to one in which 80% of people live paycheck to paycheck, will never retire, exploited mercilessly and just as cleverly by the very capitalism they go on believing in faithfully and cheering for. Hence, as a result, the polity collapsed too. From something like a barely democracy to one which didn't function at all, as extremists took it over and began the project of regress, stonewalling, paralyzing, and jamming up the gears of an already sputtering machine. System failure, wham, crash. In such a society, there is only one route left. Each stratum, each caste, must prey on the one below it, punching it down further for the illusion of prosperity to appear. Bang! Already, perhaps you see the problem. Now, such a society is descending into the abyss. There is nowhere to go but lower when everyone is pulling the next now down a little further. Where's the bottom exactly? This is the demagogues' moment. It's their fault. Those dirty Jews, Mexicans, Muslims, those women, those gays. That much is the story of the last decade and its culmination, which was the election of the demagogue. Special social collapse, becoming a grim reality without often fully or consciously understanding really that it is collapsing, or why, or even how, only desperately trying to survive it. I'll come back to that. All this was the story of the last few years in America, but now collapse is becoming something different. It is approaching its final and terminal phase, which is implosion. Let me be precise in what I mean by that. A society collapses socially, politically, and economically from an open society into a caste society, from democracy's fundamental goods of equality, justice, freedom, and truth into authoritarianism's bads of hate, spite, paranoia, lies, rage, vice, and from prosperity into predation. But what comes next? What comes next, my friends, is the institutionalization, the formalization of, if you like, of all those things. And that is the final stage of collapse. When a society has built institutions which pervert democracy and enshrine and formalize authoritarianism, fascism, and so on, then the work of collapse is done. Society is reborn now from light into darkness as a blind, keening thing, screaming for blood. It is just a knife, a gun, a fist now, a system of violence, but I will come to all that. Democracy offers the great primary goods above, which are the most valuable ones of all. Authoritarianism offers us, in their place, corresponding bads. It tells us to prey on our neighbors and peers and colleagues and friends, and in that way to define ourselves as members of the tribe, who are the protected ones, or the true Volk, or the party members. It tells us to give up on freedom, justice, equality, and truth, and instead seek spite, rage, hate, fear, and lies, often so much so that collapsing societies come to call the latter the former, as the primary aims of society, of culture, of an economy, and of course the lives within them. Now, instead of institutions which enshrine and promote democracy's great goods of equality, freedom, truth, equality, and justice, society begins to build new institutions which produce authoritarian bads, spite, hate, rage, fear, paranoia, lies instead. How do they produce them? The same way institutions always do, by incentivizing them economically, socially, and culturally. By creating rules, codes, and laws which punish their non-production, by creating values which normalize, spread, promote, and glamorize them culturally, by creating role models of fine young Nazis, for example, who are profiled in August newspapers, by impressing upon people's minds that this is who we are now and this is what we have become. Let me give you a specific example of what I mean by institutions of implosion. Today, courts try little infants from certain ethnic groups as if they were vicious criminals. It violates every principles of reason and civilization, doesn't it? But why? What is the example of? What is it an example of? Sorry, it's written very strangely. Such a court is an implosive institutions which enshrines, codifies, legalizes the bads of hate, spite, delusion, paranoia, and fear. Now, it's true that there are always dissidents and resistances and even freedom fighters. Alas, my friends, one of the most misunderstood components of social implosion is that it rarely takes an active, loud participant majority. It only takes a minority of fanatics and a majority who is too weary, too apathetic, too resigned, or too foolish, perhaps to act before it's too late. Not totally that, but anyways. When is it too late? When the new institutions of implosion have arisen. So what too late means is that by the time such institutions have come to replace enough of democracy's institutions, then the game is over. When the courts, the governments, the libraries, the policies, and the armies, as an incomplete list, have all been infiltrated, changed, transformed from agents of democracy to agents of authoritarianism, then what is there left not just to fight for, but more crucially to fight with? This, my friends, is why it has never really taken a majority to implode a society, just a minority of committed enough fools. The problem is that America has had those in spades and still does. The Newts and Jeff Flakes and Ben Sasses, men who abjure but do not reject, who are alarmed but will not act. They do not seem to understand the complicity is not just the action of bad people, but the inaction of good people too, and much more so, where and when it matters most. America's minority of fools led it to the cliffs of collapse, and now it is pushing it off the cliffs of implosion. Remember my three examples. Let's go through them to understand how badly institutions in America have already been perverted and corroded from democratic to authoritarianism. When the fascist gang beat people on the Manhattan streets, the police were right there. In Manhattan, they are never more than a block away, really. And in this instance, apparently they stood there watching. When the would-be mass bomber began to issue threats on Twitter, users reported him, but no action was taken. Then he was suspended after he was arrested. LOL. And a caravan of refugees, which is to say a few hundred souls seeking refuge, is demonized as a criminal gang full of terrorists daily by some large component of the media, the intelligentsia, and the polity. How many institutions is that? Is that just three examples? You can judge for yourself. The point is that all this is the institutionalization of violence, and while it's true in a sophomore grad school way to say, but a society is always institutionalizes violence, dude. Yes, we all know that. Wisdom is understanding there is a world of difference between a system that minimizes some necessary level of violence so that the public good is safeguarded, and one that maximizes violence, which trickles down in great waves from caste to caste, from tribe to tribe, so that there is no longer any public good. One is democratic, the other fascist, to speak plainly. The point is that many, perhaps the majority of America's institutions are now beginning the process of institutionalizing authoritarianism's bads: hate, spite, rage, delusion, lies, paranoia, fear. They are institutionalizing violence, rewarding people for it, whether economically, socially, culturally, professionally, or punishing those, of course, who receive it. So by implosion, I mean the institutionalization of violence. And when that process begins, it is often both unstoppable and far swifter and more deadly than people realize. Soon enough, the brown shirts and death squads and morality police stroll down the streets, caning and beating those who look them in the eye. Soon enough, people cheer publicly, even if they are disgusted on the inside, when the knives cut and the guns fire on the helpless, powerless, and weak. Soon enough, a society is just a gun, just a knife, just a fist. Just violence conducted over and over again daily by the mindless against the powerless, at the behest of the powerful. Violence which is ecstatically ritualized, celebrated, and applauded, whose rituals serve the purpose for checking for and enforcing every last bit of absolute conformity in habit and in thought. Conformity, submission, obedience, to hate, to delusion, to the lie, to lie that is always violence. For the moment we see the truth of another, their grief, their sorrow, their mortality, we do not wish to harm them, do we? We take them in our arms like a brother, like a mother, like a father. We only harm them when all we see is a monster, an infection, a stain, something to be rubbed away and cleansed before it infects us too. Should we think that, then, when we have become what the fascists wanted all along to reduce us to, the gun, the knife, the fist? Ah, you see, you just thought it, didn't you? Don't be ridiculous. It can't happen here. Ah, my friend, you poor soul, but hasn't it been all long? Excuse me. Vote. Then vote as if your life depends on it. It does. Only maybe you don't know it yet. Okay. I don't know what you all thought about that article, and I don't know what I think about that article either. Surely things seem strange and bad, but surely there was a lead up to this, and We could talk all day long about what the things that led to this, or that lead up to this. But I'm going to blame or put some blame, or maybe a lot of blame on propaganda and the weaponizing of propaganda and the institutionalizing of propaganda, and the idea that we have to support the troops and we have to support the military. We must do it, or else you're an unpatriotic commie bastard who is just the most horrible human being in the world if you don't support war. But the other thing is that we have been lied to by the media for so long, and people know that we're being lied to, and so now nobody can trust anything. Nobody trusts institutions, nobody trusts the news, and rightly so, because we have been as corrupt as any other society. We have dollops and huge chunks of corruption going on. And somehow we elected the most corrupt individual as some kind of rejection of that corruption, or rejection of the falsification of what it is that we're being told every day by the media. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's seen, so on the right, and all the Q followers recycle this one video that Donald Trump, it's a Donald Trump speech. Jesus Christ, I wish these dogs would shut up. It's a Donald Trump speech that I had never seen before, before I actually was watching some of these channels. And I don't think, obviously the speech was not played on any left-leaning or liberal channels, not on CNN, not on MSNBC. I don't even know if it was played on Fox News. But anyways, it's Donald Trump just basically saying, like, I'm going to save you from this corrupt, this corrupt liberal elite, deep state, the swamp or whatever. Basically making a pitch that sounds, would sound good to anyone, really. Like, if you didn't, when I listen to this, I just hear basically, somebody saying, like, yeah, all the things that we don't like, all the bad things, we're gonna go in there and we're gonna root out this corruption. And it's the same pitch that Obama gave 8 years earlier, which was like, I'm going to do all these things and they sound really great, and I'm going to get us out of the wars, and I'm going to close Guantanamo, and I'm going to give us free healthcare, and I'm going to fix the economy, and I'm going to do all this stuff. And like, he barely did that stuff, if at all. And so that's what people are sick of and pissed off of. And they just keep on going, for the next person that, says something nice in a believable enough manner that, a majority of people are like, all right. And then you have somebody like Hillary Clinton, who is supposed to uphold the ideas of the left and, maybe a more moral standpoint, but, clearly she's just a wreck of a human being. Like, so you have people voting basically against her because she's just so horrid. I mean, there are a lot of reasons that we're in this mess. But there isn't any reason that we can't, there's a lot of people that want good things for this country. It's just that, we keep getting really, really bad choices, and we keep getting left with the option of, here's this bad choice, here's a little bit less bad choice. How to fix this, I don't really know, but like, it's not that we're you know, we've always been a pretty kind of on the edge of fascist country. You know, we've been that way for a really long time. Um, how do we subvert this corporate fascist, you know, oligarchy? How do we get out of this mess? I don't know. I don't know. I might have some answers. Let me think about it. Maybe y'all have some answers. Maybe you can drop some in the comments below. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. And again, thank you so much for your contributions, for your support. I really, really appreciate it. I don't thank you enough, and I apologize for that. Hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.